rescue somebody. It's the only time I feel my humanity come back.
On the 26th of November, 2024, a judge in Larimer County, Colorado, said something from the bench that judges do not usually say out loud. She said there was absolutely no sense to this case. Judges deal in sense. That's the work. Motive, intent, mitigation. The whole system exists to take something that looks senseless and give it a shape a courtroom can hold. Judge Sarah Cure had a shape in front of her that afternoon. She had a guilty plea. She had a defendant. She had a victim who had survived. And she said out loud that there was no sense in someone coming into our community and firing guns at humans. 15 months earlier, 3 people had been in a supermarket car park in Loveland, Colorado. 2 of them were asleep on the ground. A vehicle came past. Someone inside it fired. The vehicle didn't stop. 1 man was hit. He went to hospital and came home the same day. By the standards of the cases that usually get told this way, almost nothing happened. 2 things make this one different. The first is what the man who fired the gun told police in Montana when they asked him why he'd picked them. The second is what he did afterwards from a jail cell to the 18-year-old who'd been driving. And there's a third thing, which isn't about this case at all. It's about how many times something like this has happened in America since 1999, and about the fact that nobody official is counting. Loveland sits about 50 miles north of Denver, where the planes stop and the Front Range starts. Around 81,000 people. North Cleveland Avenue runs north to south through it. In the 800 block, there's a Safeway, a supermarket with a car park out front. On the night of Wednesday, the 9th of August, 2023, 3 people were in that car park. 2 were asleep on the ground. A third was nearby. They weren't, as far as any record shows, doing anything at all. Not arguing with anyone. Not being watched. 3 people in a supermarket car park at night in a town of 80,000 and 2 of them unconscious. Here's the fact that decides everything else. A vehicle came through the lot. Shots were fired from inside it, and the vehicle kept going. There was no confrontation. Nobody got out. No argument that escalated. No robbery that went wrong. No earlier grievance that anybody has ever produced. The car arrived. The shots happened. The car left, which means that when the trigger was pulled, whoever pulled it had never spoken to the people on the ground. They were strangers, and one of them decided anyway. I'd like to tell you who they were. I can't. Here's everything the public record holds about the man who was shot. He was 47. He lived in Loveland. He was hit in the lower body. The second man was 34 from Fort Collins, about 15 miles up the road. He wasn't hit, and a third person was nearby. No age, no town, not even in any account I can find whether that person was a man or a woman. That's it. 2 men, 2 numbers, 2 towns, and someone we know nothing about at all. Every documentary you've watched about a case like this has a section where you meet the person. A sister describes them. There's a photograph from a birthday or a graduation. You find out what they wanted to do with their life, so that when the harm arrives, it lands on somebody instead of on a category. This film doesn't have that section because the material doesn't exist. 2 Colorado newsrooms covered this case for 15 months. A district attorney's office issued statements at every stage. Nobody printed their names. That's going to matter later. Hold on to it. Before we go any further, I want to put you in that town in that particular summer, because Loveland in 2023 was a place already having an argument about the people in that car park. In January of that year, Colorado ran what's called a point-in-time count. It's a federal exercise. Every county in America sends volunteers out on one night in the last 10 days of January and tries to count everybody sleeping in a shelter or outside. The 2023 count found 14,439 people experiencing homelessness in Colorado on a single night. That was a 39% increase over the year before. The 4th largest increase of any state in the country. Unsheltered homelessness, people sleeping outside rather than in a bed somewhere, was up 50% in 12 months. The reason isn't mysterious, and it's worth saying plainly because it explains who ends up in a car park at night. In 2010, about 2/3 of the rental units in Loveland were priced below $1,000 a month. By 2023, that share had fallen to 12%. And statewide, to afford a 2-bedroom home at the going rate in Colorado that year, you needed to earn about $32 an hour. Colorado's minimum wage was $13.65, which means a person on minimum wage would have needed to work roughly 94 hours a week to afford it. So this is a town where the floor had quietly dropped out from under a certain kind of person over about a decade. And I want to give you the scale of it, because the scale is smaller than you're probably imagining, and that turns out to matter. In the most recent count available, January of 2025, Loveland tallied 180 people experiencing homelessness. In a city of 81,000, most of them were in a shelter. 78 were living on the streets. Larimer County as a whole came to about 580 people, roughly 190 of them outside. For comparison, Denver, which is about 10 times Loveland's size, counted more than 7,300. 78 people. That's the population Aaron Lambertus drove into Loveland and went looking through. Not a crowd, not an encampment the size of a neighborhood. 78 people in a town of 81,000, sleeping wherever they could. Statewide, the trend was moving hard in one direction. Colorado's chronically homeless population, people who've been without housing for a year or more, had grown from about 1,780 to about 4,450 over the preceding decade, an increase of roughly 150%. But in Loveland itself, on the night of the 9th of August 2023, we're talking about a very small number of people, most of whom would have been known by sight to anyone who worked downtown. And Loveland was responding, genuinely responding. In April of 2023, for months before the shooting, the city opened a facility on South Railroad Avenue as a taxpayer-funded overnight shelter for 70 people. In July, 1 month before the shooting, the city council created something called the Loveland Homelessness Task Force to guide how the city made decisions about all of this. So on the 9th of August, when a car came through that Safeway car park, Loveland was a city that had opened a shelter in the spring and formed a task force in the summer. It was on paper a community actively trying to work out what it owed the people sleeping outside. That November, 3 months after the shooting, Loveland voters eliminated a 3% city sales tax, and the council started looking for things to cut. One of the pastors who sat on that task force later described how the argument went in the town afterwards. His summary was that people were asking why the city was giving money to homeless people when it couldn't afford a fireworks display. The task force no longer exists. The shelter's future became the subject of years of council meetings. I'm not telling you this because it caused anything. Nobody in that council chamber is responsible for what happened in that car park. I'm telling you because when we get to what Aaron Lambertus told police about who counts and who doesn't, I want you to understand that he was not saying something nobody had ever thought. He was saying a thing out loud with a handgun that a great many people were arguing about that year in more polite language. Loveland police responded to the car park that night. Then they did something that looks almost boring from the outside, which is usually what good police work looks like. They worked out what the vehicle was. It was an SUV, and when they ran it, it came back registered to a 27-year-old man from Bozeman, Montana. His name was Aaron Elias Lambertus, registered in his own name. He had fired a handgun into a supermarket car park from a vehicle the state had on file as his. By the day after the shooting, detectives had identified the vehicle and the people they believed were in it. The day after that, they were on a plane. Bozeman is 700 miles northwest of Loveland. Most of the day at the wheel. That's what Lambertus and the person riding with him had done in the hours after the shooting. Got on the road and driven home. Loveland detectives flew to Montana, contacted local authorities there.
Oh, we worked on that together, yeah.
And made the arrest the following day. Both were held in the Gallatin County Jail on no bond holds, waiting on extradition back to Colorado. Each was booked on 2 counts of attempted first-degree murder. Think about what that took. 2 days after a shooting where nobody died, in a case with no witness who knew the shooter, no relationship to trace, no motive to reconstruct, a mid-sized city police department had identified a suspect in another state, coordinated with a second jurisdiction, put detectives on a flight, and made an arrest. That is not a small thing. Cases like this, stranger violence, victims who are hard to locate for follow-up interviews, no obvious motive, are among the hardest to close anywhere in the country. A great many of them are never closed at all. The Loveland police chief at the time was Tim Doran. He said his department had moved heaven and earth to take the 2 suspects into custody. to prevent, in his words, more random acts of violence. More. 2 days in, before anyone had been charged with anything, before any of the motive was public, the chief was already using the language of a thing he expected to happen again. There's something I skipped past, and I skipped it deliberately. They arrested 2 people. The second name on the charge sheet was Ayla Osterloth. Both were from Montana. Both were charged identically, 2 counts each of attempted first-degree murder. And when detectives finished reconstructing what happened in that car park, they established who had done what. Osterloth was driving. Lambertus fired the gun. Aaron Lambertus was 27. Ayla Osterloth was 18. I'll leave that there for a moment. I think I know what it's doing to you. I think it's the wrong thing, and we'll have to work our way back from it. Old enough that Colorado charged her as an adult on the same counts on the same day as a man 9 years older. You want to know how she knew him? So do I. And here's what's strange. Across 15 months through arrest, plea, and sentencing, the district attorney's office called her exactly one thing. Co-defendant, never girlfriend, never partner, never friend. Not one release, not one statement characterizes what these 2 people were to each other. That's unusual. In most 2 defendant cases, the relationship is the first thing a prosecutor explains, because the relationship is how you explain the crime. Here, nothing. So I'm not going to guess. That's a gap in a public file, not a gap in this film's research, and filling it with a theory doesn't make it insight. But the state had to make decisions about her, and the decisions left a trail. They charged her identically to him in August of 2023. 2 counts of attempted murder in the first degree. At that point, as far as the paperwork was concerned, these were 2 people who had done the same thing. They did not convict her of that. In June of 2024, 10 months after the arrest, she pleaded guilty to attempted murder in the second degree, a Class 3 felony, a clear step down. Now, that step down is not a gift, and I don't want you to hear it as one. Colorado does not accept an attempted second-degree murder plea from someone who was merely present at a crime. Second-degree murder in Colorado means knowingly causing a death. Attempted second-degree murder means taking a substantial step toward doing that knowingly. She wasn't a bystander. She wasn't a passenger who found out afterwards. She drove the car in the state's position. The position she agreed to in open court is that she did so knowing what was happening. But when the district attorney's office explained her sentence, it gave 2 reasons for it: her age and her role in the commission of the crimes. Her role, that's the state's own language from the office that prosecuted her. Not her lawyer's language, not her family's, the prosecution's. And what it means is that the people with the full file, the interviews, the phone records, the forensics, everything we don't have and never will, looked at what she did and what he did and concluded they were not the same thing. They charged her as though she were his equal in August of 2023. By June of 2024, they had stopped believing that. Something happened in those 10 months to change their minds. We find out what in about 15 minutes. The question everybody had from the night it happened was the simple one. Why? Not why that town. Not why that car park. Why them? 3 people in a supermarket lot, 2 of them asleep, none of them known to the man in the passenger seat. Aaron Lambertus answered it. At his sentencing, the deputy district attorney prosecuting the case, Jessica Hitchings, told the court what Lambertus had said to police. He told them he wanted to shoot someone who no one would really care about, someone he believed wasn't a contributing member to society. Listen to how organized that is. He wasn't looking for a victim. He was looking for a type. He drove through a town he didn't live in, and he sorted the people in it into ones who counted and ones who didn't. There's a decision in that sentence. Several decisions. A criterion applied to strangers from a moving car. And the people on the ground met his criteria for one reason. They were asleep in a car park. Now, if you have watched a lot of true crime, there's a thing your brain does at this point, and I'd like to interrupt it. Your brain files this as an aberration, a one-off, something so strange that it can only be explained by whatever is individually wrong with Aaron Lambertus. I understand the impulse. It's a comforting way to hold it, but it isn't accurate, and the next 12 minutes are about why. Since 1999, an organization called the National Coalition for the Homeless has been keeping a list. They started doing it because nobody else was. The list is of violent attacks on people experiencing homelessness committed by people who are housed. They compile it from news reports, from local advocates, from police statements, from anywhere they can find one. By their count, there have been somewhere between 1,400 and 2,000 such attacks in the United States since 1999, and between 375 and just under 600 deaths. You may have noticed that I gave you two numbers for each. That's not sloppiness on my part, and it's not sloppiness on theirs. Different reports from the same organization covering different windows and different methodologies produce different totals. Nobody can reconcile them precisely. And the reason nobody can reconcile them is the single most important fact in this section. There is no federal system that collects this data. The FBI publishes hate crime statistics every year. It has categories for race, religion, sexual orientation, disability, gender identity, ethnicity. It does not have a category for this. So the only national record of violence against unhoused people in America is a list kept by a nonprofit in Washington, D.C., assembled largely from newspaper clippings, which means every one of those numbers is a floor, not an estimate. A floor, the count of the ones that got written about. The attacks are recorded in 47 of the 50 states, plus Puerto Rico, plus the District of Columbia. In the 2-year window covering 2016 and 2017, the coalition documented 48 lethal attacks and 64 non-lethal ones. In 2018 and 2019, 39 lethal, 44 non-lethal. Between 2020 and 2022, 97 acts of violence, of which 48% were fatal. Nearly half. And here is the statistic I have not been able to stop thinking about since I found it. According to the coalition, in 14 out of the last 15 years, deaths from violence against homeless people in the United States have outnumbered the deaths from every other category of fatal hate crime combined. Every other category, together, against a category the law does not recognize, tracked by nobody official, in a country that publishes an annual report on all the others. Now I want to show you something about the shape of these attacks, because the shape is why this case matters beyond Loveland. The coalition's data says that 72% of the victims were men over the age of 40. The man in the Safeway car park was 47. The same data says that 48% of the perpetrators were male and under the age of 20. Not middle-aged, not people with long violent histories. Young, frequently in groups, frequently with someone else driving. I want to be careful here because this is a pattern in aggregate data, not a diagnosis of the two people in that SUV. Aaron Lambertus was 27, not under 20. Ayla Osterloth was 18, and she wasn't the one who fired. But the general shape of the thing is not exotic. Young perpetrators, older victims, frequently a pair or a group rather than one person alone. Frequently a vehicle, frequently a victim who is asleep or sitting or otherwise not in a position to run. The Loveland shooting is not a strange outlier in the record. It sits almost uncomfortably neatly inside the middle of it. There's a phrase the coalition uses in one of its reports that I keep coming back to. They describe what they call the false anonymity of homelessness. And they argue that this false anonymity is what creates the conditions for the violence in the first place. That's a careful claim, and I want to unpack it because it's the thesis of this entire film. The argument is not that people attack the homeless because they hate them. Sometimes that's true, and sometimes it isn't. The argument is that a person sleeping in a car park appears to someone driving past to be nobody in particular. Not a man with a name, a history, a sister, a job he used to have, a reason he's out there. Just a shape on the ground. And a shape on the ground looks like a person whose absence will not be investigated. That is not a feeling. That is a calculation. It is exactly the calculation Aaron Lambertus described to police. Let me stay with the counting problem for a moment, because it isn't an administrative detail. It's the mechanism. When a hate crime is committed against a federally protected class in the United States, several things happen more or less automatically. The category exists, so the incident can be recorded as an instance of that category. The recording feeds a national data set. The data set produces an annual report. The report generates coverage. The coverage generates political pressure. The pressure funds prevention, and it funds prosecution. None of that happens here. There's no category, so there's no data set. No data set, so no report. No report, so no coverage of the pattern, only coverage of individual incidents in individual towns, each one arriving in the local news as though it were the first time anyone had thought of it. Each attack looks like an aberration, because the only apparatus that could show you it doesn't exist. And it runs the other way too. Think about what it takes for an attack on an unhoused person to reach that coalition's list at all. Somebody has to report it. A journalist has to write it up. The write-up has to survive into a searchable record, which means the attacks that get counted are systematically the ones committed against people who were visible enough to be written about. The victims who were most anonymous, the ones nobody knew, nobody missed, nobody called about, are precisely the ones least likely to appear in the only record that exists. The counting method has the same blind spot as the crime. And I'd like you to hold that next to something from the beginning of this film. 2 Colorado newsrooms, a district attorney's office, 15 months of proceedings, a police chief giving statements, a judge speaking from a bench, and not one of them, at any point, printed the name of the man who was shot. He is in the record. He's in it as a 47-year-old Loveland man. That is what he is, permanently in the only account of that night that will exist. On the 24th of September, 2024, Aaron Lambertus pleaded guilty. 1 count, attempted murder in the first degree with extreme indifference. That phrase matters at the end of this film. So here's what it means. Colorado has more than one version of first-degree murder. The one most people picture is the deliberate one. You decided to kill a specific person, and then you did. Extreme indifference is a different route to the same class of offense. It covers someone who, under circumstances showing an extreme indifference to the value of human life, knowingly creates a grave risk of death to another person, and thereby causes a death. Attempted extreme indifference murder is what you charge when they survive. It's a Class 2 felony in Colorado, the second most serious category the state has, behind only Class 1, which is reserved for things like deliberate first-degree murder. And his plea carried a sentence enhancement because he used a handgun during the crime. That's what he pleaded to. Here's what went away. 3 more counts of attempted first-degree murder were dismissed. So were 3 more enhancements for his use of a handgun. 4 charges became 1. That isn't a scandal, and I want to be fair about it. Plea agreements are how nearly every criminal case in America ends, the overwhelming majority in every state every year. A guilty plea to a Class 2 felony from a man charged 13 months earlier is a real result for a prosecutor. It removed any chance of an acquittal. It spared everyone a trial, and it spared the men in that car park something specific. It meant that nobody had to be located, subpoenaed, brought to Larimer County, and put on a witness stand to be cross-examined about where they were sleeping and why. For victims in this position, that is not a small mercy. It may be the single most humane thing about the outcome, but it does something to a record. 3 of the people in that car park were the subject of charges that no longer exist. There will never be a hearing about them. There will never be testimony about them. Their names will never be read into a transcript by a clerk. In the file, those charges simply aren't there anymore. Which brings us to what Jessica Hitchings stood up and told the judge 2 months later. At the sentencing hearing, the prosecution asked for the maximum, 48 years. To argue for it, Hitchings put 2 things in front of the judge. The first was the quote, what he told police about picking someone nobody would care about. The second had happened after the arrest. Hitchings told the court that while the 2 of them were in custody, Aaron Lambertus had been communicating with Ayla Osterloth in the jail, trying to get her to take the blame for the shooting. The 19-year-old who had been driving his car, who had been booked on the same 2 counts he had, who was at that moment facing a sentence that could have taken the rest of her 20s and most of her 30s, in a state that wasn't hers, hundreds of miles from anyone she knew. He was working on her to say the gun had been hers. Remember what I said earlier, that the state charged them identically in August of 2023 and had stopped believing they were equivalent by June of 2024. This is what they learned in between. Up to this point, you could construct a version of Aaron Lambertus who is just a man with a gun and a monstrous idea about who matters. Someone who did one terrible thing on one night in August and then had to live inside the consequences of it. This is a different thing. This is somebody who, having already done it, having already been caught, sat in a cell and looked at the 18-year-old in the next set of cells, And so one more person who could be spent. He picked the people in that car park by working out who wouldn't be missed. Now the next sentence is mine, not the record's, and I want you to hear the difference. What the record says is that he tried to get her to take the blame. That's the established fact, stated in open court by the prosecutor. What I think it shows is that he chose her by the same method he chose them. Somebody whose account of herself wouldn't count for much. Somebody positioned so that if she went down instead of him, the world would absorb it without much complaint. You may read it differently, but the pattern is hard to miss. Ayla Osterloth was sentenced to 4 years in Colorado's youth offender system. The YOS is a specific thing, and for years undersells it. It's a facility in Pueblo, Colorado, opened in 1994. Everyone inside has been convicted of a violent felony and sentenced as an adult. You don't arrive there through the juvenile system. You arrive because a sentencing judge specifically recommends you for it, having decided you are young enough and salvageable enough to be worth the attempt. The minimum anyone serves is 2 years. The maximum is 7, whatever they were originally charged with. And behind her 4 years sat an 8-year Department of Correction sentence, suspended. Fail the program, serve the 8. That was a judgment call, and it carried real risk. A 19-year-old convicted of a violent felony sent to a rehabilitation program instead of a prison, with almost a decade hanging over her if it didn't work. If the assessment was wrong, the consequences land on her and on whoever might be in front of her next. Aaron Lambertus was sentenced to 20 years, followed by 5 years of parole. Now, 20 years sounds like a number a judge chose. It mostly wasn't. Under Colorado law, a Class 2 felony carrying a crime of violence designation doesn't sit in the ordinary sentencing range. It sits in a mandatory one, 16 years at the bottom, 48 at the top. The judge could not go below 16. Not for remorse, not for a guilty plea, not for anything. 16 was the floor. The prosecution asked for 48. The ceiling, she gave him 20, for years above the minimum the law would allow her to impose. And then Judge Sarah Cure said the thing we opened with, that there was absolutely no sense to this case, that there was no sense in someone coming into our community and firing guns at humans. Humans? Out of every word available to her from that bench, she chose the one you only need when somebody has argued the opposite. There's one more thing in this case, and it isn't in any of the coverage. Colorado has a bias-motivated crime law. It's the state's version of a hate crime statute, and like every such law, it works by listing the things you can be targeted for: race, color, religion, ancestry, national origin, physical or mental disability, sexual orientation, transgender identity. Read that list again and notice what isn't on it. Aaron Lambertus told police he picked his victims by working out which people weren't contributing members of society. That is, by any ordinary use of the words, a crime committed because of who he decided those people were. But no category in Colorado law names it, because being asleep in a car park is not a protected characteristic in Colorado. Some states have made a different choice. Maryland added homelessness to its hate crime law in 2009. Under Maryland's criminal code, targeting someone because of their homelessness carries up to 3 years as a misdemeanor, and up to 10 if the underlying offense is a felony. Florida lists homeless status among its protected characteristics and reclassifies the penalty upward when it applies. Alaska has moved in the same direction. So has Maine. So has Washington State. The District of Columbia's code lists homelessness explicitly alongside race, religion, and national origin, and requires that data on those crimes be collected. Seattle attaches extra penalties for malicious harassment targeting homeless people. Cleveland and Cincinnati have their own provisions. So this isn't a fringe idea, and it isn't untested. It's law in several American jurisdictions, and has been for over a decade. Colorado has thought about it too. In 2011, a state senator from Denver named Lucia Guzman brought a proposal to add homelessness to Colorado's protected categories. On a Thursday in the spring of that year, the Senate Finance Committee approved it, 4 votes to 3. No debate. The vote was strictly along party lines. All 4 Democrats in favor. All 3 Republicans opposed. It needed to clear one more Senate committee before it could reach the full chamber. It never became law, The list I read you a few minutes ago: race, color, religion, ancestry, national origin, disability, sexual orientation, transgender identity, is the list as it stands in Colorado today, 15 years after that vote. And the same thing has happened at the federal level repeatedly. The federal definition of a hate crime covers offenses motivated by bias against race, gender, religion, disability, sexual orientation, ethnicity, or gender identity. Advocates have been trying for years to add housing status to that list. There is a congressional caucus on homelessness. Its co-chair told reporters some years ago that the majority of support for adding homeless people to federal hate crime protections had come from House Democrats, and that it had consistently failed to attract Republican support. His account of the objection was that it stemmed from a reluctance to expand the scope of hate crime protections generally, an ideological disagreement about the category itself, rather than about the people in it. The argument advocates make for the change is not primarily about punishment. The director of community organizing at the National Coalition for the Homeless put it this way: adding homeless people to existing hate crime statutes sends a message that is both symbolic and practical. Symbolic because it says this counts. Practical because a second offense attaches, and because the crime then gets recorded somewhere. Recorded somewhere. That's the part I'd underline. The Maryland statute doesn't just create a penalty. The DC Code requires that data on those crimes be collected, which means that in the District of Columbia, an attack like the one in that Safeway car park would generate a line in an official government dataset. In Colorado, it generates a line in a spreadsheet kept by a charity if a journalist happened to write about it. Now, let me be careful about what I'm claiming, because it would be easy to end a film like this on an accusation that isn't fair, and I don't want to do that. If Colorado had passed Lucia Guzman's bill in 2011, it would not have added a single day to Aaron Lambertus' sentence. Bias-motivated crime provisions of that kind are far lesser offenses than attempted first-degree murder. He pleaded to a Class 2 felony with a crime of violence enhancer. There is no version of this case where a hate crime charge makes his punishment worse. Nobody let him off anything. No prosecutor made a mistake. Jessica Hitchings asked for 48 years, which was everything the law permitted her to ask for. What a category would have added is not a punishment. It's a name, because the record says extreme indifference. Extreme indifference means he didn't care who was in front of him. It means he fired into a car park without regard for who happened to be lying in it. That is not what he said. He said he chose. He said he was looking for someone specific, not a specific person, but a specific kind of person. He applied a test. The men on the ground passed it. That is the opposite of indifference. Indifference doesn't have criteria. And so the file on this case closes with a description of Aaron Lambertus' state of mind that Aaron Lambertus himself contradicted in a police interview in Bozeman, Montana, in August of 2023. The law had no other box to put him in. At the start, I said we'd come back to the people on the ground. A 47-year-old man from Loveland went to sleep in a supermarket car park on a Wednesday night in August. He was shot. He went to hospital, and he came home the same day, which is the only genuinely fortunate fact in this entire story. Somewhere in the Coalition's records, if it was ever reported to them at all, he has one non-lethal incident in Colorado in 2023. A line on a list kept by a nonprofit, because there is no other list. In the court file, he is one of 4 counts, 3 of which were dismissed. In the coverage across 15 months, he is a 47-year-old Loveland man. He is not a footnote to Aaron Lambertus. But that's what the record made him. And it made him that for exactly the reason Lambertus predicted when he chose him. Somebody knows his name. Somebody has known him his whole life. Somebody taught him to ride a bike or didn't. Somebody has a photograph of him from before. And the only thing any of us ever needed to know about him is that he was a human being asleep in a car park who had done nothing to anybody. And a stranger drove past and decided that made him worth less. There's one question people still argue about here, and I'd like yours. Aaron Lambertus was sentenced for extreme indifference, for not caring who he shot. But he told police he chose. So was indifference the right charge, or just the only one Colorado had?